Okay. Well, thanks for coming to the Cypress Meetup. So we're doing something a little different for this meetup. Previously, we did some presentations. This is going to have a presentation, but at the end of it, there's a training exercise that we can do together as a group to just kind of solidify some of the things I'm going to talk about today with Cypress. So if you like that, let us know. If you don't, let us know. We're still looking for ideas on how we can make this meetup great for everybody. So let us know through the meetup or the Slack group, however you want to get in contact with us. Today we're going to talk about Cypress, and Cypress is an end-to-end testing tool. So we're going to talk about what end-to-end testing is first, then discuss a little bit about Cypress, and then we'll go into the Dojo. So that's me. I'm John. I'm here because I like to test things. I've always liked testing things. It doesn't only pertain to end-to-end testing, but I really do like end-to-end testing. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I do tweet sometimes. That's my Twitter handle, and we have a hashtag now, so you can use that hashtag if you're tweeting about the meetup. Just trying to get some more people involved. Okay, end-to-end testing. End-to-end testing, by definition, is a methodology used to test whether the flow of an application is performing as designed from start to finish. So that would be the definition of what end-to-end testing is. But let's talk about what actually constitutes that, right? So that's a good definition, but it's kind of not great for tying it to your system. So the big thing is that it must be tested under real-world scenarios. And so a real-world scenario is your system should be connected to a database. It should be communicating with third-party APIs. It shouldn't be faking any of that information. It should use real-world data in its tests. All of those are very important for it to qualify as an end-to-end test. I mean, you certainly can write them not that way. You're not going to get a score or a grade on it, but it's important to kind of make that consideration. The main thing that you want to test in an end-to-end test is the dependencies of your application. So some of those dependencies are connecting to a web browser, using things like SSL, server communication, APIs, all that kind of stuff. And the main difference between a unit test and an end-to-end test is that connected piece. So you might have heard of unit tests before. You may be familiar with those. Unit tests are more detail-oriented. They, by design, eliminate dependencies. They don't want you to write a unit test that crosses over to different sorts of dependencies. They want you to write one that's very focused and detailed. End-to-end tests encourage dependencies. They want you to bring those in and get them to work. So really, it's not end-to-end test or unit test. It's end-to-end test and unit test. You want to use them both together. So what I want to show real quick is a flow of an end-to-end test. And the reason I want to show this is because I think it's kind of important to understand that one of the challenges with end-to-end testing is even understanding what scenario you want to create with an end-to-end test. Because a lot of these systems, they have a lot of functionality. So do you want to split it by modules? Do you want to split it by user roles? Do you want to split it by a specific logical piece of the system? There's a lot of considerations to make. So I'm just going to show an example for if this were an email application. But the thing to remember here is just to think about those scenarios as you're writing your end-to-end test. And you don't want them to overlap, right? So you try not to test the same thing more than once. Okay, so in this scenario, I've created a test that basically has 6 steps. The first thing it's going to do is it's going to launch the URL for your email application. Then it's going to log in, and the keyword is with valid credentials. We're not faking the login process. We're actually making a login request to the system. And that's good because that's probably the first point where your application is going to hit the database. So you're going to have the database interaction tested there. Then I'm going to go to the inbox. I'm going to read an email. I'm going to try to compose a new email. And then I'm going to log in. So I chose this test for a few things. For one, it's kind of easy to see an end-to-end flow of an email application, which this does do. But the other thing is this is a typical user interaction with the system, right? So if I've updated some code in how emails get read, I want to make sure I didn't break composing emails, right? I want to make sure I didn't break, logging in. So this test is going to catch that. You'll run this every single time you do a deployment. So this is a good flow, and we've closed the loop by logging out. So you start by logging in, you end by logging out. It's a full complete process. Okay. Okay, so that covers most of the basics of end-to-end testing. Obviously, you can go very deep on theory and what to test and things like that. But knowing that, you should be able to get started and writing some tests. And that's the important thing, is just get started on them, and then you'll learn more things. If you try to master them, you'll have a long time before you write anything. So the tool we're going to talk about is Cypress. I'm a huge fan of Cypress. I've been trying to do end-to-end tests for a few years now. I've tried a couple different tools. I've tried WebDriver, Selenium. I've tried Telerik Test Studio was another one I tried. Ghost Inspector, things like that. So I've tried a lot of different tools. This is by far the best tool I've ever encountered with end-to-end testing. So I would definitely encourage investing in understanding it because it's a great tool. Why is it so great, you may ask? It's fast, easy, reliable testing for anything that runs in a browser. Anything. So if your app is written in Java, if your app's written in Python, if your app's written in JavaScript, React, Angular, .NET, pretty much any language, as long as you can get to it from a web browser, you can test it with Cypress. And what are some of the features of Cypress? So it's platform agnostic. Like I said, you can test on any device that you want. All the tests are written in JavaScript. So I think most people here seem like they're familiar with JavaScript. But if you're not familiar with JavaScript, I wouldn't discourage you from looking into it. Again, the concepts of end-to-end testing are important. It's an all-in-one testing tool, which is really the first tool that I've ever seen that is like that. And what do I mean by all-in-one? I mean that it has the runner, the test runner, the testing framework, and the debugging tools all built in to the system. So in most cases, you don't get all of those. You'll have like WebDriver as a test runner, and then your tests are written in like .NET or some other language. And then debugging, you're doing that through Chrome or some browser or Node or something like that. So you usually have to piecemeal things together. Cypress bundles it all together in a great single-to-use tool. It's much faster than other traditional end-to-end testing tools. So I don't know if anybody has experience with other end-to-end testing tools, but I can tell you it is way faster than other ones. And one of the key differences there is that it doesn't use the WebDriver technology that I've been mentioning. And it's not important that you know what that is, but essentially it just lets you emulate the browser. And because it has to spin up a version of the browser and it runs in a sandbox, it's very slow and it spins up a new one after every test. So typically end-to-end tests are time-consuming. You could have 40 or 50 end-to-end tests, and that could take an hour to run all of those tests. With Cypress, it's very, very fast because it uses different technology to accomplish that. Okay, so let's take a look at a Cypress test, and we'll go through the pieces real quick because this is what you're going to be writing. So this is an example of the Cypress test. This is written in JavaScript. It takes a lot of cues from like the Mocha testing framework. So if you're familiar with Mocha or Jasmine, it's kind of like Jasmine as well. This may look familiar. But if you're not, we'll talk about each piece real quick before we move to the Dojo. So this first spot up here in the describe block, this is just a logical grouping of your tests. This is something you decide as the developer. This group is called My First Test. That's not a great name for a group. But you could call it the blue tests or the red tests. You can group them by colors, by your favorite movies, whatever you want to do. I would probably pick functionality. But it's a logical grouping you decide as a developer. So don't add any weight to what's actually written there. And the cool thing is that Cypress takes this group and displays them in that order while it's running a test and in the output. So really think about how do I want my output to look when my tests are done, and that's the grouping that you'll create. It doesn't have any actual weight on the functionality of the test, though. The next one is the it statement. This one is where the test begins. So an it statement is the beginning of a test. You're saying it should do something. And there's no rule here on what you call the test, but a lot of common testing formats will say that you do the should, expected behavior, when, system under test behavior. Right? So if you look at my test here, I have should, and the behavior that I'm going to do is navigate to a new URL. When, and the testing scenario I'm doing is clicking type. So it's should, what you want to have happen, when, the actual scenario that you're testing. You don't have to write it that way. That's just kind of a common testing practice. And then you'll notice the second variable to this it function is a function. So this is where the test is actually going to fire. So anything you put inside this function block is what is going to actually be run during the test. So this next piece here has the side keyword in front of it, CY. This is the beauty of Cypress. They've built a ton of built-in functionality for you to help write tests. So their documentation is great on trying to understand what you can do. In the demo application you're going to get today, you have a ton of examples that Cypress themselves wrote. So there's going to be a lot, so you're not going to go through them tonight, but I would recommend that you take a look at those before you start writing tests, just to kind of see their flow and how they do things. It's really helpful. But the great thing about it is it's hopefully pretty easy to understand what's happening based on that. So in this case, we're calling side. So we want Cypress to execute some command on our behalf. And we're saying the visit, and we're giving it a URL. So you don't need to know anything about Cypress or JavaScript to probably figure out that this is going to go to that URL when the test is run. And the other thing to remember with tests, if you're not familiar, is I would like to follow the 3 A's, which is arrange, act, assert. That kind of follows all testing paradigms. So this would be the first A in that, which is arrange. We're arranging what we're about to do in a test. So those 3 kind of pieces you should try to get to every test. This next command would be the act command in the 3 A's. And here we're doing a sci.contains. So if you're familiar with jQuery or JavaScript, you may know that they have things called DOM selectors or element selectors to find things in your web page. Cypress supports all of the native selectors that you would be familiar with. So it could be a CSS class selector, an ID selector, an element selector. You can do all of those. But it also has some of these pretty nifty built-in ones, like contains. So this is just going to look through the whole site for the word type in every single element. And when it finds it, it's going to grab that out. So there's no selector for that. So this is a nice little thing that Cypress gives you. And the cool thing is this creates what's called a chainable element. And that's a very fancy word. It sounds like some complicated thing. But all it really means is that you can then act upon it. Right? So you can do something, you have a chainable element, you can chain together actions to it. So if you notice, after we do the contains type and we find that element, I'm doing a click, which is the chainable action. And again, these tests are hopefully very easy to read and understand without having any knowledge about Cypress. It's going to look for something that says type, and when it finds it, it's going to click. Okay? And that's the act portion. The final portion of a test in the 3rd A is the assert. And this is when you want to check that something happened that you expect to have happen. So again, we're using Cypress to help out here. We're using chainable command URL. So we call sci.url. It's a little different from sci.visit. Visit's going to take us somewhere. URL is going to give us the current URL. So far our test went to example.cypress.io. It found an element with the word type. It clicked that element. And now I'm expecting it to have taken me to a new URL. And the way that I'm going to make sure that happened is I'm going to find the URL. I'm going to do a should command, which is an assertion command. It's saying check this value. The first thing is the equality operator. So you can do things like equals, less than, greater than, not equal. In this case, we're going to do include. And the command's actions URL. So this test will pass if it can find an element that has the word type, click it, go to a URL, and have that be part of the URL, commands and actions. Okay? So just real quick to show, this is the main testing group in blue. This is where all of the tests actually happen. And the second blue here is the grouping of tests. So you could have multiple if statements inside of this one describe. And again, it's just so Cypress can include all of them in a nice grouping for you. So that is the anatomy of a Cypress test. Is there any questions? You good on that? All right. So now we're going to write some code. I've given you all the knowledge you need. You can now go out and write your own Cypress tests. So bust out the laptops. And here is your guide to Cypress testing.